Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's good to have you all here with us today. And I thought I would start out a little different this morning and put you on the spot and ask you a couple of poll questions about grandparents raising grandchildren. So the first one is, how many grandparents do you think are raising grandchildren compared to the number in foster care? Let's see if I can put it. Okay, now you can respond. Is it showing up on your screen? Maybe I have to share my screen.
It is.
It is showing? Oh, okay, there it goes. All right. And you also responded to the second question. Okay. All right. I just thought it might be good to get you thinking about some of those things before we got started here. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And the number one answer on the number of grandparents compared to foster care was 50. And 71% of you know that there is some support for children that are grandparents or other family members are raising. All right. Okay, so I'll start out sharing my screen. And okay. So before we get into the elder abuse and grandparent abuse and talk about grandparents raising grandchildren, do you have any questions from the previous days that you hadn't gotten around to answer or getting answered? And you can either put them in the chat box or you can put them on the screen. Or you can unmute yourself and ask. That's what happens when I have too many things going on. No questions at this point? It's a good thing I came up with some. All right, so I'm going to talk a little more again about what elder abuse is and how to recognize the forms, and then look at a traditional view on grandparents, some of the research on custodial grandparents raising grandchildren, and then talk about the grandparent information sheet that I sent along with the slides. So again, the different types of elder abuse and neglect are willful or abandonment, which is the willful unintended care or custody by an identified caregiver who has assumed responsibility when a reasonable person in a like situation would not do so. So an elder being left alone and the caregiver leaving for the weekend when the elder is not able to take care of themselves for that length of time. Emotional abuse, that infliction of mental anguish, pain, or distress upon an elderly person. This can be threatening, criticizing, debasing, ridiculing, ignoring, or yelling at the elder. Financial exploitation, we've gone through in depth. It's the illegal or wrongful exploitation of funds, material assets, property, or other resources. So improper use of documents and not using the assets in the way they're needed to take care of the elder. Neglect, when a caregiver actively refuses or fails to fulfill the degree of care that a reasonable person in that situation would exercise. So an elder left lying in their own urine or feces for extended periods of time, elderly developing malnutrition and pressure sores due to lack of appropriate care, or an elder living in a filthy environment. Then self-neglect is if that elderly person lacks capacity secondary to the physical, mental, disease, substance abuse, or cognitive reasons to manage their basic activities of daily living of a reasonable person in a similar situation. So they're not able to follow the medical regimens prescribed by the doctor, or they can't get what they need as far as their medicines, or they just aren't able to take care of themselves and don't have anyone there to help them. Physical abuse, we get into slapping, hitting, punching, pinching, throwing things at an elder. All of those types of things come into physical abuse. Sexual abuse is any form of sexual contact or exposure without consent, or when a person is incapable of giving consent. And here, the physical signs tend to be tears in the genitals, or on the breasts or inner thigh, unexplained STDs, a fear of touch. One example that I was given was an elder that was in a nursing home, and a couple of the orderlies were trying to give him an enema, and he was really fighting them, and they didn't realize that he had been in a boarding school where he had been sexually abused, and them holding him down and giving him the enema brought flashbacks of that sexual abuse from childhood. So those kinds of things can come up as well. Spiritual abuse, colonization or abuse impacting the values and identity of a person is soul wounding, and that ends up being spiritual abuse, like an elder not being taken to ceremonies or spiritual events, the ceremonial items being taken from their home and used or sold without permission. And then again, as I've gone over a few times, why an elder is vulnerable to mistreatment. Well, the psychological, social, and economic factors, as well as the mental and physical conditions of the elder and the perpetrator. Things like cognitive impairment, things like dementia and Alzheimer's, intimate partner violence. Maybe it's gone on throughout the whole life of the adult life of the elder and their partner or spouse. Living with others, that, that multi-generational home sets up sometimes stresses and things that result in abuse or neglect. Social isolation, times like now when they're really cut off from what's going on and being able to be in contact with someone that they can get help from. And they may be currently more dependent on others for assistance than they've ever been before. Speaking as an elder, I know that as you're less and less able to do the things that you used to be able to do, things like changing a light bulb become a bigger deal. You can't get up on ladders and things like that and maintain balance as well as you used to when you were younger. And that fear of losing that independence if somebody makes a report that there may be abuse or neglect. So culturally appropriate practice. Things like in hospitals, designating a healing room to be used by the spiritual healer can be monumental for abused Native elders. Having a place where they can smudge, where different spiritual components can be utilized, where most places, you know, you can't have any smoke or anything for smudging or in the rooms. If there could be a designated place that could happen. Recruiting native translators can be effective in helping the victims communicate in their indigenous language. For some of our elders, that's more comfortable. Ensuring that the basic needs of the elders are met is really important. But more important is building a society where they continue to be productive and valued as they age. I know when I was in New Zealand a few years ago, we were at a marae for a weekend retreat on suicide prevention. And the elders that were over the marae, I remember sitting next to the woman and the couple, and she told me at least 15 times in the little while I was sitting there which one was her granddaughter, and the whole story about her granddaughter and her dancing and things like that she was doing. So, but you know, I just listened to it time after time. She had a role and she was valued and she was feeling productive. It's essential to be aware of cultural sensitivities and aspects of practice that differ from other ethnicities when working with Native American elders. You need to have people that understand the culture and they're aware of things and they aren't doing things that are offensive. Do not assume. Instead, make it a habit of always asking questions in order to clarify what you've understood. In fact, it's important to, you know, to repeat back and say, okay, let me make sure that I've got this clearly, what you said was, and make sure that you're understanding what they're attempting to communicate to you. Language is very important, as I've said before, in working with elders. And Twyla Baker Demaray in 2005 found that with Native elders, when you ask about abuse or neglect, that they indicated that they hadn't experienced any. But when they used the term disrespect instead of abuse or neglect, the elders discussed many of the incidents that could be classified as abuse or neglect. And also when asking Native American women about sexual abuse, they would not admit to any abuse occurring. But when the term bothered was used, those descriptions of rape and sexual exploitation were detailed. Some traditional views. Our elders were our first teachers, as their knowledge and experience is passed down orally from generation to generation through our stories or by example. And children, a long time before colonization, received their education from their parents, grandparents, and other family members. The children were taught appropriate life skills, which would help them in managing the challenges they encountered. Everyone had a role and a contribution to the community or to the family, and learning those life skills in such a way that doesn't harm the environment or interfere with the health and well-being of those around them. Traditional roles in the family, everyone had a role to play within the tribal community. Men hunted for food and provided protection. Women cooked, made clothing, and took care of the home. Elders were responsible for teaching and raising the children about traditional ways of knowing. And although there may have been some crossover in some things, everyone had a particular role and they were productive and contributing to the well-being of the community. Within the clan, a child would be raised to hold specific qualities and responsibilities within their society. For example, in some tribes, a bear clan was gifted with strength, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, and they would stand for the good of the community. And those in the bear clan were raised to be leaders of the tribe. So let's look at some of the information on custodial grandparents. Now, according to the American Community Survey from the Census Bureau, 7.8 million children under the age of 18, or 10.5% of the children, are living in a household headed by a grandparent. And that has to do with alcohol and substance abuse, neglect, abuse, and abandonment, death of a parent or divorce, and parental incarceration. And I didn't update the year, but I updated the statistics last night. 2/3 of grandparents raising grandchildren are under the age of 60. So that means 1/3 of them are over 60. And I've talked with numerous people that are great-grandparents raising great-grandchildren. 2/3 of families maintained by a grandparent also included at least one parent. So there was at least one parent in the home along with the grandparents raising the grandchildren. 1/3 of grandparents raising grandchildren have less than a high school education. 20% of custodial grandparents have an income below the poverty line. And 40% of grandchildren raised by grandparents is because of substance abuse. The average income for grandparents raising grandchildren is less than $20,000 a year. And according to the census, about 10% of Native American children live with grandparents. And we know that's not an accurate representation for grandparents actually taking care of grandchildren. It's probably much, much higher. Some of the reasons why the grandparents chose to raise their grandchildren include the parental substance abuse. That's the most common reason for assuming custody of the grandchildren. And the SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, indicated between 2002 and 2007 that about 12% of children live with at least one parent who has a substance abuse problem. Child abuse or maltreatment is just under that at 9%. Or wait a minute, just under 1%. 9.2 of every 1,000 children is just under 1%. Parental incarceration. 1.5 million adults in the US were incarcerated in 2009, and half of those inmates were parents of children under 18. Parental deployment in the military. About 1.5 million children have a parent in the military that may be deployed for long periods of time. Parental mental health problems. More than 5 million children in the US have a parent with a diagnosed serious mental illness. And the most common is depression, and that affects 6.7% of adults in the United States. Divorce. The divorce rate in the US is around 49%, so about 1 in 2 marriages ends up in divorce. We know, a lot of relationships, there isn't a marriage, and so those records aren't kept. So for every child in foster care, there are about 25 being raised by grandparents. So that was our first poll question. 25 was the correct answer. So what about our household? So 1 in 6 Americans live in a multi-generational household. As I said, 7.8 million children live in grand families where the grandparents or other relatives are householders. 2.7 million grandparents are responsible for most of the basic needs of the children living with them. So what kind of help is there? Well, taxpayers save money when grandparents raise grandchildren. They save about $6.5 billion a year by the grandparents raising or other relatives raising the children and keeping them out of foster care. So a lot, $2.43 billion is the amount households headed by people 55 and older are spending on primary and secondary school tuition. So a lot of that's private schools, but we don't, we're not going to see a whole lot of that in Indian country. Younger generations, over 50% of the grandparents talk with their grandchildren about problems they're having, as well as morals and values and religion or spirituality. So they give a lot of that culture, that tradition, the values to their grandchildren. 1 in 4 grandparents help pay for their grandchildren's medical or dental expenses. And that's whether they have them in their care or not. 30% of children under 5 with working mothers are cared for on a regular basis by a grandparent. That's a lot of young children. Here's some more. The grandparents, only 1 in 4 regularly use technology. 53% of American adults 65 and over use internet or email. And 34% of those use social networking sites. Only 18% use it daily. So when we have children, grandparents raising grandchildren and they're doing online education or they're linked in with their social networks and all of that, the grandparents are probably pretty disconnected from it. So what are some of the challenges for grandparents raising grandchildren? Well, first of all, financial. Grandparents may quit their jobs, reduce their work hours, or make other financial sacrifices to care for the grandchildren. Many times, especially, when there's substance abuse and other mental illness and things like that, causing the grandparents to take over raising the grandchildren. They're just operating on what they get from Social Security or other fixed income. One thing that I was told just a couple years ago by the director of the commissioner of Social Security was that grandparents who are raising their grandchildren because the parents are disabled by mental illness or substance abuse can work with Social Security and get the disability payments for the children or the grandchildren based on their parents' disability paid to the grandparents. And so when there's an issue of that, you need to get in touch with Social Security and see what needs to be set up for that to occur. Housing. It's also the difficulty accommodating the children in their residence. They may have downsized, they may not have the space or other accommodations for raising several grandchildren as they might in many cases. The grandparents' health, they may have problems of their own, like depression or insomnia or back and stomach problems and hypertension, diabetes. Some children may come with their own severe physical and emotional and behavioral problems because of the issues they've encountered at home. School enrollment. Grandparents can face obstacles with the child's school system in getting them enrolled and being able to access their records and things like that. Social isolation. With a child's busy schedules, they have less time for other family members and friends, leaving the grandparent more isolated from community activities. Respite care. It's vital to help strengthen the family and to prevent abuse and support the efforts of the caregiver. One of the things that Title VI programs have is respite care available for family caregivers. And I've heard Cynthia LeCount give examples such as if it's a grandparent raising a grandchild and that grandparent needs a break, then that can help to pay for the grandchild or grandchildren to go to camp or some other activity where they're away from home for a while to give that grandparent some respite. So thinking outside the box in some of those ways that may help to cover some of those costs. Legal issues. The grandparents may not have legal custody or guardianship of grandchildren. So there's a lot to consider and things that you can't do that if you don't have that legal custody or guardianship. When you're going to court rulings may differ from state to state or in the tribal courts, as the grandparents' rights are different. If there was a divorce and who has custody and all of those kinds of things come into play. You know, there's a burden of proof as to what you need to have to gain custody. The whole issues of custody, adoption, guardianship, you know, what's in the best interest? What are the financial strains and the court costs? All of those things need to be taken into consideration. And I think most times they're just ignored because they don't want to deal with all of those things. So, grandparenting in a cultural context. In Native families, the family is the foundation of the social relationships. Grandparents are viewed as the family's roots and are necessary teachers of cultural traditions and practices to that next generation. So some of the research shows that in interviews with 28 Native grandparents, that the grandparents reported taking on cultural roles just to ensure that their traditional practices and beliefs were passed on, in addition to the emotional roles that they filled for the biological and non-biological grandchildren. And Native American grandparents serve as models of appropriate ceremonial behaviors and took on the responsibility for exposing their grandchildren to tribal ways of life so they could reinforce and extend the traditional culture and practices. So this belief that grandparents have enculturative responsibilities is echoed in research studies with Native American grandparents as well as our own cultural traditions. And the use of storytelling is how we teach those younger family members. Teachings are done orally or visually with items passed down through the generations. And the grandparents also saw themselves as family facilitators, ensuring that the family was kept together. So in looking at all of that information, we started trying to put together some materials that would be helpful for grandparents raising grandchildren. And in putting those together, we started thinking about, well, what are some terms they need to know? What are some areas that they need to consider? And puts the custody of grandchildren information for grandparents handout that you were given. We put that together. So the, you know, with terms, I don't have that pulled up. But if you'll take a look at those materials, defining different terms that they might hear when they're looking at custody and things like that are very important for them to know what the person is talking about. Considering their own emotional stress, family and community supports, social supports, their health insurance, legal concerns, financial assistance, all of those things need to be considered as to whether the child is best with them or if there may be some other supports that are possible in helping to raise those grandchildren that can ease some of those burdens for them. So then the checklist, the grandparent preparedness checklist, was designed to accompany the grandparent information handout. And those topics are suggested for grandparents to consider before taking on, especially a young grandchild. Information about the child, do they have their health information, their enrollment in school and things like related to school and other activities that they're involved with. Financially, what are their abilities? Can they access other support like Social Security, disability for dependents, health and physical abilities? The elder, how well are they able to handle things? And also, what kinds of constraints might the child have as far as health and physical abilities? Support systems. Are there extended family, aunties and uncles that can take the children at various times or help with transportation or do some of the things that need to be done? All of those, what kind of transportation does the elder have? Do they have all the car seats and things like that that they need to be able to transport those grandchildren? Okay, and then this checklist just goes down and just asks a whole lot of questions. One of the things, having a binder or a folder for each child that you can put their important documents in, things that are related. And I was talking with Mike earlier this morning that in that binder, if you get some of those sheet protectors, then you can just slide that birth certificate or death certificate or whatever inside that sheet protector. And if you need to photocopy it, you don't have to punch holes in anything. You can just take that out in the sheet protector and make a photocopy for something. If you have to actually present the official birth certificate or some other certificate, you can just share that with whatever social services or other person that you need to share that with. Same way with keeping Social Security cards, their medical and dental records, all of those things together in one place. If you have a power of attorney or a custody or guardianship, consent forms, proof of their income, any documentation you have to get Social Security or anything like that can all be kept in that one binder for each child. And you know where everything is when you need it. So here's some of the references from today's presentation. And now we've got more time for discussion because I think there's probably going to be a lot of discussion with this one. So I will stop sharing. And we can open it up for questions and discussion about some of the things that I presented. I know I gave you a whole lot of information fast, but if you have any questions or comments, if you're too shy to unmute yourself and speak up, you can put it in the chat box. Marcia, you are muted. Unmute you. Now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. This is great, this custody preparedness, especially with the aspect of school starting up and everything else, because I know that with some of the grandparents that are raising grandkids now, this is great for them to have this checklist to follow. And
There's
then on
just so
top of
many
that,
things that you don't
yeah.
think about until somebody asks you for it.
Well, and then on top of this is a good format, especially if it's an adult guardianship too.
Yeah.
You know, because there's a lot of that this goes across the board for both. This is great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Huh.
Are there other things you think need to be on it that aren't?
I think, well, you pretty much have everything covered. Insurance information, if they have insurance. Some people have insurance, some people have IHS. I know IHS is standard, but that to have it on it. And then also, sometimes, you know, like if they have certain pediatricians, you know, like if there's a certain doctor that they need to go to. Or even sometimes going back to even like if we have a child that's maybe on some kind of seizure medicine that, you know, like medical, some kind of medical.
Right. Specialized
Yeah.
care and things like that.
Yep.
And as I told Mike earlier, he's asking about sharing it. You are free to share these with anyone you would like to, or make copies of them and use them with people to go through things and stuff like that. That's why we put them together.
And I think going on from what Marcia was saying, I think that would be easy to develop for a lot of elders who are caring for a disabled adult, or may have even went through the courts for guardianship of that person. It's a good way to keep them thinking about the documentation trail that is necessary to both protect their ward and themselves.
Yes. And, you know, we know so many grandparents or other family members raising those children that they have nothing. They were just dropped off and that's it. And it's important for them to start looking at these things and start to gather this kinds of documentation. That if the parents are dropping the kids off for any length of time, that they, you know, write out a consent for the grandparent to get care or whatever else that the child needs in their absence. You know, it may not be official, but at least they've got something signed by the parent saying that they can do that.
Right. And oftentimes the parents of those children have made threats that if you seek help or services, that we're going to take the kids away because maybe they're going to make us account for something or provide financial support. So those threats are often made.
That goes back to what Susan just stated with regards to, you know, like right now, the tribe, we're currently in the process of processing COVID payments. You know, they have to fill out an application. And then they also have it to where every tribal member will receive one. And that, I believe that includes our children too. And that makes it difficult because a lot of individuals that I know of, especially with our elders, you know, they don't get any of that funding. And it makes it difficult because a lot of times it's like a financial gain for people, you know, instead of looking at, and sometimes it's even the elder themselves. They're utilizing whatever extra money they get for all the resources, paying rent, lights, and then food. And then yet the person that's the natural biological parent, they're just spending freely on that. And this would be this would be a great list to actually provide to our leaders when they start making recommendations like that, to have this in mind, that they have parameters to protect those individuals from becoming more exploited.
Right.
It's disgusting, you know.
I don't remember
And
if it's on that checklist, that list of things or not, but also having their tribal enrollment card in there along with the
Yeah.
Social Security card.
yeah,
Well, and if the person's responsible for those payments out would actually do some site visits and home visits to verify where those children are living. The parents, of
Mhm.
course, are going to say, well, they're with me, they're always with me.
Mhm.
But no, they're with grandma.
So,
and that goes back to the whole thing of having people be more trustworthy about their information, you know, because somebody could be getting paid to be as a care provider for this person, but then in turn they turn around and they have the child living in another household being cared for by somebody else, being, you know, paid through that. But then yet
Mhm.
it's frustrating because a lot of times when we do our home visits and stuff, we run into that. You know, somebody who's supposed to be in somebody else's care is in another person's care, but yet that benefit is being used otherwise. So it's frustrating, and people get very, very sneaky about getting around the system just to
Creative.
very creative.
Mhm.
Yep. So yeah.
Well, and what we want to do is provide you with tools that, you know, help make things easier for you in working
Yeah.
with the families. And so if there are other things that you need, let us know, and we can work on trying to get that developed.
And you know, I don't mean to keep talking so much, but this would be a really good exercise, actually. Of I could say a week training on this topic alone.
Mhm.
That would include, you know, social services, even our case managers. I see that Luana's on, and she does an exceptional job with this, trying to enforce, you know, the issue, making the people accountable. But I could see this being more in depth with regards to having this checklist, maybe a part of the application when they start applying for services through the program,
Mhm.
to make people more prepared, I guess, to take on that responsibility. So
Well, and it's not meant to, you know, create more barriers. It's meant to help people
no,
think through the process.
exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm kind of reiterating, George. Yeah,
Because we don't
but
want to create more problems. We just want to help them think through the process and make sure that they've got everything gathered and in a place that they can access it when, in case they need it.
mhm, yep,
And trying to find
yeah,
resources that are going to help them, you know, financially support those kids, as well as finding some respite for themselves and things like that, and knowing where some of those resources are.
yeah, yeah. Uh,
Anything else?
so
Any questions or comments? This has been great, because you guys are the ones that are boots on the ground, and you know, we can create these things, but you know, it's up to you to tell us what works, what doesn't work, how we might need to refine it, and things like that to make things more useful for you, because that's why we're here.
you know, I've never heard of the term fictive kin. I've never heard that. I've heard
I hadn't
kinship,
either.
but
I had never
yeah.
heard of it either, and that's kind of a legal term.
Okay, yeah. Because I was asking Velda, she works many years, 10 years plus, in the court system, and specifically guardianships and stuff. And I was asking her about that, and yeah, that was a term we've never heard before.
Yeah, I've learned a whole
So
lot of words that I never knew before in dealing with all of this.
yeah, and then guardianship of the estate. I just look at it as when we have probates, but I've never heard of a guardianship of the estate. That would be something, you know. But
Which may be
Yeah.
separate from guardianship of the individual.
yeah,
It's if,
because I
and
have. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's if they have some type of estate or land or something like that, like, you know, say they have some farmland. Well, they can't manage it, but it's someone taking charge of that and making sure it's handled appropriately. While maybe someone else has guardianship in taking care of the elder.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it goes back to some of those things that I talked about, is pre-thinking those things. If I get to the point that I can't take care of this, who do I want doing it? How do I want it taken care of? All of that, so that their wants and wishes are recorded somewhere so someone can follow those. I know I opened up a lot of cans of worms. But they're important things. They're important things to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, Grandma, you
This is
break your
great.
leg. Who's going to take care of doing all those things that you've been doing, running around for those kids?
Well, and it also, I have like several guardians that are legal guardians that are on dialysis that I see shouldn't be guardians, even though they're the only closest relative, but yet they can't even maintain going to their sessions. And I could see them failing in a lot of these checklists when they themselves aren't healthy enough to be a guardian over these children. But geez.
And sometimes it may be, you know, sitting down and having that conversation.
Oh yeah, we've had that done, and it just ends up a big fight. We've actually talked about the revoking of the guardianship, you know, based on their lack of being healthy, and like I said, it just ends up a big fight. But yep, we're just never ending.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's why you have a job, right?
Yeah. Some days I'm like, I love my job, and then there's days where it's like, why the heck, you know? Yeah. So.
Any other comments or questions about any of the stuff from today or any of the other days?
Just me.
No.
There's so much.
Do you have any comments, Bella? No? Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Very
All
good.
right. Well, tomorrow we're going to do more of a summary of it. You're going to get tired of hearing what is elder abuse and what are the different types, but you know, it's one of those things that we have to just keep going through and know backwards and forwards and upside down. And I'll add a little more in tomorrow about COVID and some of the things related to COVID-19. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I will say thank you again. And it's been wonderful working with you again today. Great comments. And I look forward to talking with you again tomorrow. So have a good day.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Mike.